Your lips are moving, Mayor, but you're not getting much out.
Probably be best if I unmute, huh? Okay. So anyway, good to see everybody.
That other meeting ended abruptly.
I'll say it did, but that's okay. We got the committee to basically make the recommendation. We'll bring that forward in the RDA board. Okay, we got Ann coming on, Diane's coming on. So it's looking good. I think we got a quorum. Can't hear you, Morgan. Morgan, I know this is a working session. Okay, let's see if we can get Brian back on and we'll be ready to jump into our meeting. We got 3 minutes.
Mayor, Morgan's on speakerphone on my cell phone. She's still having audio issues for some reason.
I think it's her location. I mean, I didn't have a problem with speakerphone when I was sitting up there in Yellowstone back in October.
Yeah, there you go.
She just be in one of those blackout areas.
There she is.
I'm gonna try and reset my computer. So I'll try and get this meeting going on my iPad and see if I can reset my computer. That helped last time. It was my fault that you were short. I apologize for that. The economic development meeting. In order to start this meeting, I was kind of forced to end your last one, and I wanted to go sorry. So I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for putting it together. Welcome, Diane. It's good to see you. Ann, Jan, Joe. We got Steve coming on, and I believe Brian should be out here in the next, hopefully, 2 minutes. Okay, 1 minute. Hi, Andy. Good to see you.
Did that help at all?
We can hear you, Morgan.
Well, I just don't know what I did, but I'm glad it worked.
Yeah, we just can't see you.
Oh, that's my fault. There we go.
Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Andy.
Okay, great.
Okay, we're at 4:30. We got a couple things. I assume we just left Brian on one. He should be coming on. Hopefully we can get him back on as we move forward. Do want to recognize and welcome everybody out. We do have Councilmember Paul, we have Councilmember Wilson, we have Councilmember Jackson, we have Councilmember Burrell, and I do believe we will see Councilmember Saxton coming on shortly. Let me, if I can, like to read the no physical meeting location statement. As of today, or as of yesterday, we have 87 active cases of the COVID-19 in the last 14 days. And with that, I need to read this statement. I, Mayor Robert Dando, in accordance with Utah Code Section 52-3-207-4, have determined that conducting a meeting in the Roy City Council chambers presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who would be present at the City Council chambers. The basis of this determination is that due to the infectious nature of the potential dangerous health effects of contracting the COVID-19 virus, there is not sufficient space in the council chambers to provide appropriate safe physical distancing for the safety of the individuals who would attend. Accordingly, on this date, April 6, 2021 at 4:30, this meeting will be held electronically without an anchor location. So with that, we need to start this work session. Steve, if you go ahead, let's begin the conversation. Then council, let's add to this discussion. Please, Steve. You're on mute.
Just trying to bring up everything.
Thank you.
Okay, the stuff that I sent out to everybody is what was originally sent from the Planning Commission. So that's why you get it in where it says stories instead of feet, like we've changed in the downtown. And so it's the original language. So I'm hoping that as we go through it, I anticipate stories will change to feet, but I didn't want to just assume that's what was going to happen and put in what I thought it would be. I wanted to make sure that the discussion was. So going through the ordinance, it was looking at it from a standpoint of, okay, what needs to be in order to do this, what needs to change or what can change or what have you. So that's why what you've got is just a few tables and not the entire document, because again, most of the language within it is the same. It wasn't going to change. There was just tables within that needed to change. Most of that is, the uses, building types, and then kind of the details of what each building type allows, whether it's setbacks and heights and stuff like that. So that's kind of where to start from. So I'm going to share my screen.
Something I'm going to bring up while you're sharing your screen for people to chew on. I would propose that we split the train station up into districts like we did downtown. I see there being differences between, the north side of 4,000 and the south side of 4,000 in building heights and designs and setups. So that's something I think we ought to think about and consider as we're doing this.
Way ahead of you, but again, I wanted to give you the original language, the original, zones or, districts. So again, didn't want to take anything, assume anything. So again, so can everybody see the list of uses, the table of 2.1? Okay, I get a nod from Diane.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So again, it's just these three columns: station core, station general, and innovation. I know at least I want to change these, from core and general to something a little more specific, like we did downtown. We'll come up with some name, but just kind of, again, from the original standpoint.
Something maybe describe where they're at.
Yeah. And I think as we get to discussion wise, it'll come a little more evident. Now, if we have to create a different district, like Joe was talking about, we would just add a column. So it's a rather simple and easy fix on stuff like that. So again, it's those type of uses, for residential and lodging, station core, general, and innovation, to kind of identify which ones those are. I'll come back to this table because I think the biggest thing is what would be in the building types and what uses we want to allow on the first floor and then second and above. So once kind of yes, Jan?
Steve, going back, and I'm so confused. So station core, station general, if we're looking at splitting it up, then it might be different what we want to.
Right. And some of it, this is just the first table as it appears. Really, bigger conversation is going to be is, you know, say we take the general stoop type buildings. And, you know, we look at the number of stories, the setbacks, kind of everything I've highlighted. Once we get these details, then that might change what these details are in the table of use. And then when we get to, sorry, I'm kind of going fast. When we get to this drawing of the zoning map, say that the north section that's in orange is different than the south section that's in orange, then we'll just split that into its own column and kind of already have an idea of what building types would go where. So it's a big conversation that we'll try to get specific on, but I will try to help you, Jan, and everybody else understand that. I just want to kind of generally go through what I gave you and what, you know, why you were seeing certain things in certain tables and maybe not certain things in certain tables. So that way you have it all together. In yellow right now is the Innovation Center. That's mainly the airport is most of this. The old Iomega buildings where America First is. And then I think the bigger discussion is going to be in between the railroad and the trail next to the front runner station.
Yep.
If you remember right, and I can send you all the comments, but during the first couple meetings, we had a lot of public comment, especially about the front runner station and more particularly kind of down in the south portion of it. I can send those comments back to you so you have them. So the question is going to be, I guess first is, do we want to separate the north of 4,000 from the south of 4,000?
Well, let me ask maybe a broader question. This particular area is in question from the original discussion took place a year ago, as Steve indicated. Are you comfortable that we can have a conversation, a couple of work sessions to talk about this area? Should there be areas that should be excluded? Should we change it up a little bit? I mean, are we ready to have a conversation about the area that's been presented?
Yes.
I
Okay.
believe that some areas should be excluded, and we've had some changes along the way. So, you know, I guess that's part of the discussion is what areas we're thinking of discussing.
Well, that's right now, it's everything that's marked. Steve has presented this because this is what was handed to the city council over a year ago. And the policy really is that we have to address this as it was presented. We can exclude, we can add, we can do anything we want to modify, but I just want to know we have a starting point. And at this point, if you're okay with this, then we start with this as it's been presented, and we can now go into each area. Are we okay with that?
Mayor, can I ask, originally when we looked at this, our primary focus, or one of our primary focuses, was to address the affordable housing. Is that no longer part of the question, or is it still the question? Because we certainly have addressed it in a big way in our downtown area.
It will continue to be a question we have to answer.
Right.
Because every year, about November, I believe it is, I have to hand in a report to the Workforce Services and Wasatch Front Regional Council on what we've done as a city to help alleviate housing shortage and affordability.
Right.
So at some point, Steve, we won't be able to add any more affordable housing.
That's right.
I mean, so at some point, your report or whatever is going to say, we have already addressed it to the max that we can address it. So
Right.
My question is, how much do we have to address it before we're at that point?
Well, that's a great question. That's something the state will have to determine if we've met the intent of their desire versus what they're requiring. Each year, their legislation seems to change a little bit. 2019, we were required to put it in the general plan what our intent was of the 23 strategies. And then last year, they required us to have a report of what we've done with those strategies. So they're kind of making it from going from a 30,000 foot level discussion in a general plan to a on the ground discussion in ordinances and building. So, I mean, tomorrow, next year they may require that, and I'm just throwing stuff out, that each city is required to have X number of land that is, 40 units per acre or more. I really don't know until, the state does stuff, but I know in the Focus Roy plan that was adopted in 2017, downtown and the Front Runner Station were the two areas to help alleviate, one, the requests that we kept getting on multifamily throughout the city, and two, to help with the affordability of homes.
I guess my question is, and I don't know how to word this, but are we getting ahead of ourselves? Are we going too aggressive when we're going to have to address it again?
Well, that's a good question. Let me see if I can help with that.
Thank you.
I send you some information specifically talks about the approval
Is that
last year.
this, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay.
And it would have basically talked about two important documents, or three really. Steve alluded to the fact that Senate Bill 34 talked about the requirement that the city had to address 23 elements. And in those elements, we did that when we satisfied the requirement to downtown. But in that same bill was a requirement that said you have to pick two things or one of two things associated with the train station. And our general plan was amended and it basically met that standard. Now remember, all it said in that law is that we had to put that in a general plan, and then Steve has to report that requirement yearly. First, it reported that the adjustment was made in the general plan, and then what activity the city's doing to uphold to that general plan. Now, that's basically what it is. Then in Senate Bill last year, 150, it come out and said that if in fact within a half a mile around that train station, you have to build a plan. And I think UDOT's influence into that process would be is within a half a mile, according to their documents, you can improve ridership by having a plan of what you want to do in terms of development. Now, you can only develop the property within a half a mile of that train station that's developable. You can't go up there and take all of the residential units you see within that half a mile circle I showed you and talk about rezoning or doing something with that, because it's already done. The development is completed. So the only real viable thing you can do within that particular law, and that's Senate Bill 150, is you can look at the undeveloped property around that train station and what do you want to do with that? Hence, what we're talking about right here is we're talking about what do you want to do with this development property? And it does not include a half a mile, to be honest with you, the I-Omega facilities or anything up that far to the east. It's outside of that boundary. And so now the question is going to be is, what do you want to do with it? And that's all we have to do. We can say we don't want to do anything with it, or we can say we want to develop it. So it just means that you have to kind of make a decision of what you want to do with this property. Now, if you've seen this year's bill that was also approved, it was Senate Bill 217. Now, 17 basically does not force the city to do anything, but it says if the city wants to do something with the train station area within a 3rd mile around there, then they will put in motion a bunch of agencies, including the Governor's Office of Economic Development, to help us go through the funding and the development of that property around the train station. Now, I also sent to you UTA's requirement for the 18 acres they own on the property that's located in this particular conversation. And they have some unique standards that they basically are expecting the city to look at in terms of their property. Now, remember, they do not set the zoning requirements on their property inside of our city. They are much like a property owner. They have a voice in it. They have some expectations, But the city council really dictates today what you can and cannot do with that property, UTA. And they're encouraging us to basically take advantage of saying is, well, here's what we're allowing you to do with your property, and then set the zoning requirements that's compatible with what they're expecting to come out of that property. But you don't have to. Let me just make that clear. There's nothing that says you have to, but you have to be compliant by law to the requirement that's in Senate Bill 34 that says either you're going to restrict the parking requirements in the area, or you're going to have to consider some type of a density improvement at the train station. You have to do that in the code, and we have done that. The question is, are you willing to accept that? Now, the general plan talks about some density changes. What we're going to talk about here in this workshops is about what does that density changes need to look like? What are you willing to put in there to allow this thing to be compliant? And that's what you need to talk about. He's giving us some ideas. He's giving you some, for better words, some proposals to zoning changes that will get us there. If the council is agreeable to those, perfect. If the council wants to modify those, perfect. But he's put that information in front of you to decide, and it's from this work session, and eventually what comes out in a city council meeting formally will decide what we're going to do with this particular train station area. And as it's presented to us, what to do about the business park. And so we have to just make some decisions. What do you want to do? And you have a choice to make that decision. Okay, Steve, so here's the question. It appears at this moment, the council is somewhat receptive to have a dialogue on everything that you've marked. Now we can go into some details about the different areas on what the council's thinking they'd like to do or should be done, if anything be done with that particular property.
So Joe had kind of mentioned that split the north part of 4,000 along DNRG Trail from the south part. I tend to agree because the south part does have, lack of a better word, more nuances than the northern part, but it is also kind of different in the aspects of the south part, the homes, the single family homes that are there are more or closer to those properties than the homes on the north. And the topography is different. So it makes sense. I know originally it was just all thrown into one. But again, I'm not stuck on the map that's in front of you. We can definitely change it up. I know there was some of what the Planning Commission had concerns with, and you can see in the lighter orange, is these are ones that are right up, butting up against residential. They wanted that one a lot different in, the number of stories allowed than the darker orange. So the height limits on the lighter orange were more compatible with the existing. So 3.5 stories, 35 feet is what the single family residential zones can have. So again, you're kind of seeing in general, it's 3 stories. They had that big concern that they didn't want, 5-6 story building right next to single family homes.
Hey, Steve,
So Steve, would you go back to your map again for just a minute?
that's what I was going to ask, because there's a section where I think we ought to,
So down on the, for me, on the right of the dark orange, the single family dwellings are actually closer to that area than they are at the top.
Uh-huh.
yeah, those 3 parcels right there below 2675, Steve, go back where you were just at, down.
Oh, here.
Down,
Other way,
other way.
to the right,
Keep
very
going.
right.
Keep going to your right.
Page. Right
There.
there, 3
Those
parcels.
3 parcels.
I would advocate that those be the light orange as well. So you're minimizing, you're maxing out at like 35 feet, because otherwise you're going to create a tunnel effect along the train tracks.
I would agree with that, Joe. They're actually closer. Those residents are actually closer to the development than in other areas.
Yeah, and that's what I was mentioning. We also, the topography does change quite a bit from the railroad tracks to this parcel. It is about 20, 25 feet lower. So if you do a 40-foot building, what will be seen from the homes on the east side of the tracks would be 15 feet. So it's not going to be huge if you did a 40-foot building. And that's just a number I threw out. I know when the developers for these two parcels were talking to most of the residents, they were okay with a 2-3-story townhome. Nothing that was taller than 35 feet.
35 feet was what most of the property owners I talked to along 2675 on the west side of the road, 35 feet, they actually went out there and measured it out. And 35 feet looked about right. But
Yeah.
if you go on the flip side of that, on the other side of 4,000, you can probably almost go up to 60 feet because
Yeah,
they
yeah.
sit higher and they're farther back.
Right. So I don't know if you can, does this other map kind of appear?
Yeah.
Okay. So don't worry about the innovation center. This is for something different. So my thought is to split the two. The north can be a little taller than the south.
What do you
Right.
feel about that, council? You okay with
Yep,
that?
I totally agree with
I'm
that.
much better with that.
So
I
to me,
still think, Steve,
the light orange could be a 40-foot. And again, we can change that to 35 to be compatible with what the single family home height allowance is. The red could be 60 feet. The
Right.
blue is kind of the question mark.
in the
in my
corner,
mind.
see where the Louisiana look cuts out? Go up to the
Here?
corner. No, back down. From where you see the train down into that little corner where it looks like it breaks out to Louisiana, right there. Go
Okay.
up. I think you could go there along the tracks and go a little bit higher there because you've got that big tall hill there. I think that could almost be close to his height. I think there at least needs to be a story differentiation between that piece and the rest.
The one that's in blue,
No, what's west of the blue?
west. So in between the tracks.
Not all of that, just what is exactly west of the blue. I think you
Okay.
could go one story higher there as well.
My thought was I want to look at the homes to the west of the trail and make sure they're not overwhelmed as well. For the same reason as those on 2675 don't want the tunnel effect. I don't want, for the same reason, those along the west side to have this really tall building because they are about 10 feet taller. Ground level is 10 feet taller than they are. So if you did allowed a 60-foot building here, it's almost going to be 70 feet to them.
That makes-
I personally like changing all of that to the light orange. I think you've done a good job with that, Steve, as far as
And it's just
breaking
my
those
thought.
two areas out.
The blue to me is where the language will get difficult, and just kind of hear me out for a second. Because you have a 40-foot or 35-foot along buffer between the single family homes and the UTA property. But as long as, say this is the height of those homes on the UTA property in light orange, and the blue, as long as it stays the same, even though topography wise, it's different. So it may be a 50 and a 60-foot or 65-foot when you finally get down to the tracks.
Okay, yeah, you're right, Steve.
This height, you're not different.
Yeah, you're right on. I was not looking at that piece I was talking about changing as being west of the tracks. So yeah, I agree with what you have 100% right there.
So I separated the blue from the west side of the tracks because the west, south of 4,000, west of the tracks, I don't want these homes to be bombarded with a gargantuous building very similar to those along 2675 commented that they didn't want large buildings along their road.
Yeah, you're right. And in the blue section, if we do the light orange as 35, the blue, you might even be able to go up to 50.
Well, again, I think the language will have to be, because like if you go out in Salt Lake, they had a height elevation limit. And that was what the state capitol was. So every building south of them, even though topography changed, wasn't above that height. The church office building is what, 26 stories? And I think a few buildings around there about the same height. So the blue, it could start out maybe 40, just depends on topography, and maybe end up at 60. But as long as the height doesn't change from what those homes are.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts. But again,
exactly what I was thinking on the other side is, as you approach Hinckley, you could probably go higher because the topography
up here
increases up. Yes.
Yeah, up here, because you got that one building that's already 3 stories, and the top of it's not even at the bottom of their land.
Correct.
And so I don't know. Again, this is just to me a starting point on the
no, I like what you've done there. I think we just got
of this area.
Okay. So let's go around the council and talk about this this change. Diane, your thoughts?
I am glad that we're being really respectful of height. And I think there are a couple of things here. UTA really wants a mixed use option available, and maybe that's okay. But there's a lot more to the mixed use thing than just height and story. I'm just not sure that all of that, because this code has the building right up to the sidewalk, and there's so many other features to it. So height is one of them, but I think there are other features that need to go in, and maybe as we were talking about, maybe, maybe we can still get the height, we can still get the extra units, but we don't have to do it in the same fashion that the mixed use ordinance has it in. But I believe the gradating of the height is good. And then in regards to the 35-foot, keeping that, I think that's very good.
Okay. Brian, your thoughts on this?
Well, I like the changes we've certainly addressed. You'd hate to have tall buildings in your backyard, and you've got a lot of residents that are going to be still probably concerned, even though we've graded it so it's an equal rooftop. And maybe we don't know this yet, but do we have an idea of how many units we're going to be putting in that property altogether? Do we know that yet?
No. I will tell you, Brian, there's 2 schools of thought here, and I'll just tell you what it is. The current TOD requirement for the 18 acres. And you can really basically ask, what do you want it to be? As a landowner, you can say, I will tell UTA's position on their 18 acres is they'd like to get at least 25 units per acre of residential. That's their policy. You can pull their policy right off the net and you can see it. And they're, for this particular, which is called a community station, and Roy is a community station by the Wasatch Regional Council standard, then they're looking for 25 units, dwelling units per acre. Now, the private property component to this, and remember, there's only everything here is either public or private. The private sector, which is mostly the stuff that's in the yellow in this thing, and private is also some of that red that goes up the other side. That's whatever you want it to be, as a property owner. And the voice would be from the people. I think Joe said in the introduction, he says, I've talked to some people, and he says, hey, if you can keep this at 37 feet max, that's acceptable. And I think we can pretty well decide whether or not 37 feet or 40 feet is what we want this to be. So you'll make that determination. But just recognize the fact is the UTA, who owns 18 acres, is going to say, I really would like that to be at least 25 units per acre. And now the question is, what does that mean? How does that develop? How does that lay out? So that hopefully answers your question. And do you have any comments about this proposal to change then this document to show this yellow instead of leaving this the same color as the north?
No,
Mayor,
I
can
think,
Can I piggyback
I-
onto your comment? Mayor, can I piggyback on your comment there?
Please.
As you've mentioned many times before, this year, Senate Bill or House Bill 217 allowed UTA to have two projects in one of their two of their front runner stations to be up to 50 units per acre.
That's correct.
Some of this is also to help say, hey, UTA, guess what? We have an ordinance, so get you between your 25, get your 25. So please don't bother Roy with that 50, go somewhere else.
Right.
My fear is if we don't do anything, UTA will come back and say, okay, Roy is it, and we have no stay on their 18 acres.
Yeah, and Steve, you're absolutely correct. That's my biggest concern right now, because right now, Senate Bill 217 says the city can choose if they come back, much like we see with school districts. And Steve, you're a good example with the the Roy Junior High. You didn't have a lot of choices of what they did with that property. UTA is a district. They can do whatever they want with their property. Right now, they have to listen to us. Tomorrow, next legislation, that could all change. And so we really have a good opportunity to dictate what we want it to be, and hopefully don't lose that opportunity to decide what's right for Roy City and get the public input to help us. And I kind of got your impression you felt pretty comfortable with this change.
yes, weren't they gonna down by 2675? Wasn't that one time proposed all storage units? Because I'd rather have housing myself rather than storage units, but I didn't know if that was still in the works for storage units.
They have made application for storage units, but that doesn't necessarily, again, these are just colors on a map.
Right.
Right. Say the storage units doesn't go through, it falls through. We rezone the property for what is being proposed, then they have the option to do what's being proposed. Right
Well,
now,
I like the 35-foot height. I know when I went into Mr. Holene's backyard and checked that out, I know that was his big concern, and I like you dividing it off 4,000 to make a north and a south.
Okay, thank you. And Jan, you have a comment? You're mute, Jan.
Sorry about that. So I do have a question. The blue area that Steve indicates is our real questionable area. How much of that belongs to the railroad?
railroad or UTA?
I'm sorry, UTA. I'm sorry.
All of it.
All of that is UTA property.
And if you see where my cursor is, the orange there. So they have not just the blue, but east of the blue as well.
Their concern area where they're saying, no, I want 25 units per acre is where? Or I
it's
want 50
property.
units
So let
per
me,
acre.
I'll zoom in.
Okay,
So the blue
right.
and then the orange east of the blue. Now there's two parcels that Roy City owns in this orange. this one, which is a water
Yeah,
tower,
yeah, I know where that is.
and then this one right here. UTA owns the corner, all of the blue, and then this orange where the hand is, or my cursor is.
Okay, so what we are proposing, if we go to the 35 feet
Okay.
high,
Uh-huh.
would that satisfy their requirements?
It could,
Yeah,
but I think if we do 30, again, just bear with me for a sec. If you did the 35 in the orange and allowed the blue to be a little taller, whether it be, 50 or 60, not married to any of those numbers, then that way they're, even though they might not get it in the orange, they're getting it in the blue. So all 18 acres would probably have that average of what they want.
And you said there's a gradation between the orange and the blue.
yeah.
So the rooftop might look the same.
Right. And that's kind of what the blue is, kind of a question mark. I didn't want to say 50 or 55 because topography may make it that it's a 60-foot building, but the rooftop height from the orange out is the same.
So it's the rooftop that we ought to be concerned about,
Yeah,
not
so to me,
necessarily the.
This might be a 60-foot building. This one's only a 35, but they're the same height looking from the orange perspective.
I understand.
Steve,
Okay. I like what you've done with that. That makes sense. But the question is, what do we do with the blue?
Yeah, and
I get
that'll
it.
be some language-wise, I'll have to figure that out. But if the council likes that kind of thought, then I can research of how to get that language. So the blue area is
Steve,
taller than,
So now going back to the question that Diane had, I mean, I think we can kind of understand the building height, but what does that do with the other aspects of lack of a better word, form-based code?
setbacks, again, is another thing that we have to discuss.
Okay.
What downtown, the 15 feet off of 19 is not going to be the same here.
Right.
Right.
But most of the setbacks are off of a public road,
And there's not
private,
public roads.
not private roads. So there'll be a differentiation between that. But again, east of the blue, those will butt up. The back side of those buildings will be against the back side of the single family. And the ordinance already has requirements that they have to step so many feet after the property line. So some of the existing mixed use code helps all these property owners next to it. Setbacks, again, will still need to be something we look at. It's not set, what you've got today is just the original language the planning commission sent you.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay.
Steve, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
As you've done calculations about how many, for averages, how many stories will it take to get 25 units per acre in the blue area?
That is such a
3 stories. Thank you, Mayor.
it's a difficult one to really pin down because, again, are they public roads or private roads? If it's a private road, then the setback doesn't have to be as big as if it's a public road. Public roads are wider than private roads because we have to have 60 feet or 50 feet or whatever so roads take up space. So I think, 3 to 4 gets you that. I think. I'm not a developer or a designer to that, but I think if we did the orange at 35 feet and the blue has an average of, again, throwing out a number of 50, that can get 4 stories, I think we've met it. It won't be able to truly answer your question until we have someone that can design it and, kind of figure it all out.
Steve, question.
Uh-huh.
Do we have anywhere in Roy where we've got 25 units per an acre, just so we can get a visual on what that'd look like?
I can send you some pictures, but I'd have to go back to find out when some of our multifamily was developed. In 2004, before our current ordinance, we had a zone that did allow for 23 units per acre.
Okay.
In 2005, when the zoning was changed, everything was reduced down to 12. So I'd have to go look and see what we have that may get close to that. I do have a book that says visualizing density that I could give you, kind of send you some pictures of what 23 units per acre looks like from different other cities that, may not be in Roy.
Right.
But yeah, I'd have to do some research to answer that question, Brian.
And let me go back, if I can, to Diane's comment. She says, there's no question UTA will have an interest to look at some type of mixed use. But mixed use does not have to necessarily be vertical. It can go horizontal. So if the council basically says that, you know what, we can get their density requirements with 3 stories, maybe 4 stories. And so we keep a lower profile. But if they want to have some type of commercial, then put a commercial in front of it. Put a commercial somewhere else on that property. And that will help us also to keep it that. We don't have to think in terms of mixed use that has to be, the bottom floor has to be commercial and the top floors could be residential. It doesn't have to go that way. It can go any way you kind of want to play this out. And so think about that as we start to continue these dialogues on this particular piece of property. There might be some real solutions here that's workable. You just have to set that in the ordinance.
So Mayor, the advantage to that would be that they could put 25 units within their acreage and then still have still have commercial on their property. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the selling point we want to take, Jan, because this is important. Their whole purpose in terms of wanting to put 25 units per acre is ridership. Take a look at where this particular train station sits. You have got a lot of residential people who are within walking distance of that train station. And the half-a-mile circle that they're talking about is the whole purpose of that is that people can literally walk to the train station for ridership. What I'd like to sell UTA in terms of what you're proposing and what you finally come up with is that we can come in here and we can put a substantial number of riders on that train station, on their train, because of all of the ridership opportunities within that close proximity. And to me, I think that's a great selling point. Not all the places along the front runner station have what we have, because I'm saying to you, we already have some density just because of where it's located. And remember, just up here in the parts to the north, we have a pretty high density area dealing with trailers. Those mobile homes up in that area up there do provide excellent ridership opportunities. So to the point, let's think of what we think we can use and we can do here. And then let's take it back to UTA that says, I think we can achieve your ridership requirements, because you're gonna have to look at the whole space that's around it. And we think we can get it we can get a lot of people able to walk to that train station.
Is part of their problem though, so much of it is taken up in parking?
Surely that will be part of it, Jan. And this will allow opportunities. If you read their document, their TOD document, they kind of like the idea of basically considering stacking, putting some type of a parking structure at that location. And they may decide to do that. That could very well be. Parking is definitely part of it.
You know, what they've got today is based on, it's just vacant. So they put a parking lot at grade.
Yeah.
If they get buildings, and they will, stack it, put some underneath and some on the first floor. But I'll guarantee you this will not be like a downtown. You may have a mom and pop shop, a little coffee shop, or a donut shop, and you're not going to have much more commercial.
Right. Joe, comment.
Yeah, if you look at what we approved down on 4,000 in Midland, that's a mixed-use development, but it's not on top of each other. It's
Right.
one's in front of the other. And my thought is not require the first level of every development to have commercial. It's to require a percentage of commercial in their development.
And it can be. If they choose
That
to
makes sense.
use a different type of building, maybe they want 100% residential. Are you willing to allow that flexibility, which then means you don't need to have 5 stories, you can do it in 4 or 3. So
My concern, Joel, is if you do a percentage, like down where my cursor is, if all of a sudden you have a percentage requirement of commercial, you're not going to get it down here. Or you're not going to get it up here. You'll get it around.
Somehow
the train
we have to
station.
ensure that there will be some commercial in here.
Right.
Otherwise, it'll go 100% residential, I can guarantee.
Yeah, and I think you do it some of those building types, like a row home, which will be mostly around the residential. It doesn't suit it, but something right around the train station, a general stoop or I'm losing my thought here, but could have some.
You give all that orange to row homes, you're not going to get any commercial.
And do you want it commercial?
The only thing I could think of commercial would be, like you said, a mom and pop sandwich shop or coffee shop, donut shop. That's the only thing I could ever see going in down there.
I think your blue right here is probably the only spot you're going to get commercial.
Exactly.
Up here next to the residential, do you really want people
UTA up for that,
walking around?
No.
Is UTA up for mixed use?
Well, if you look at some of their other properties, they have commercial with it.
That's
And
right.
it's the demand. I mean, we're not going to be a Farmington station.
I know.
We're not going to be
So-
an Ogden City.
So your language, Steve, in the blue area could say a percentage must be commercial, but it doesn't necessarily have to be on the first floor level of your structure.
We could try to get it that way.
Yeah.
Again, this is
And-
just the initial conversation, how the map works out. Then we get into the details of how much, what uses are allowed on which floor, what the setbacks are.
And to answer your other question, Jan, I'd like the next workshop meeting to bring more public input. I don't have a problem asking UTA to come in and actually, as a property owner, what do you want to do with your property? Hear it from them, ask them the questions. I think they have a right to be a voice in this conversation. And I think we have a right to ask some questions in terms of what they're thinking. But I will indicate to you, to their document, their approved document, this is considered a community station, and they have set a standard of that. And if you look at what their standard requirements are and what we are seeing in front of you from what Steve is proposing, I'm indicating to you, I think we can be lockstep to what UTA is expecting their community station to look like on their property. What happens around the outside of that, because they don't own all that other property around, that's owned by private sector. What do you want to do with it? Because they have
Well,
a choice also to see what they want to do with it as well.
I think the 35 feet in the orange areas, in the light orange of the other map. That would be my thought. And then in the blue area, then possibly we can go a little higher depending on, I would call a rooftop height. I don't know how you do that. I mean, Steve is the master of that, not me. But somehow to keep that rooftop limited.
There you go.
And then if we need commercial down in that area, limit the commercial to, on their property, possibly in the blue area.
Yeah. Well, then I know we only got about 10 minutes left. Are you okay then with Steve to go ahead and make these adjustments that you've proposed, bring it back to our next workshop with with the adjustments that we're talking about and some ideas for you to consider? Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me
Unfortunately,
too.
I won't be available April 20th, which is your next meeting. I've got a pre-engagement that I've got to be to. Well, I got to go yell at some girls on a soccer field.
So I think we need you here for our work meeting. So I think it wouldn't be bad to say a month out, not 2 weeks out.
Yeah, this can give you more time if you'd like just to look it over. I've sent you all a worksheet. If you've got some specific things you'd like to focus on, some questions, we used the worksheet before, please fill that out. Let's have Steve go ahead and kind of draft up some of the ideas that we talked about tonight and present those back to us. That'll give us a little more time to go ahead and kind of look at the document, see if there's any of the things we have. I've sent out to you some copies of at least 5 things I'd like to talk about. Some of those involve the industrial park. So feed that information in. Let's have those dialogues and let's walk through some conversation. Diane?
Sure.
You need to make sure the cemetery is a use in that area.
Yeah, that has to be put into the conversation at some point. We'll look at that. Yes. Diane, go ahead.
So I have a question in regards to the meeting in a month, and you were talking about public comment. I was
Yes.
just wondering, how we're going to bill that or get people involved. And then also you had recommended that we may have a task force of citizens to be involved. And I had a couple of people wonder what the step of that was when they heard that this was coming up for conversation. So I just wanted to know, where you were at on the task force to let them know.
Yeah, a couple of things. If you probably talked to Morgan sent out, I believe, Morgan, this particular discussion, these charts to about 85, I think, residents. Is that correct, Morgan? Not sure. We had a list. I asked for a bunch of people that are living around this particular place to give us their email address. They did. She sent out this document to make sure they're all informed on that. What I'd like to explore with you in the next meetings would be do we want to assemble then a group of people to kind of be a working group to help us kind of frame this up on what we can do. We can surely establish some, here's the limits we've got, and try to see if they would take some action to help us to say, is this something that's workable within this community since they're living in this community? And I think we should do that. We can always drop back into another kind of survey, and that's surely an option if we want to do that. But I think we can do this differently. And then let's ask your other question. You're going to have a conversation in the city council meeting that's going to talk about when do you want to come back to normal? And one of the things that I think is very helpful and has always been helpful is if in fact we can have some type of a town hall conversation where we can put the information out and allow the people who are oftentimes very touched by this to have some verbal input. As you will know, we're moving closer to getting past this pandemic. We need to kind of ask that question, when do we think we'll be ready to basically have town hall kind of conversations again so that we can get the voice of the people more engaged in this process? We're going to have that conversation in city council. So there could be some things, Diane, that's going to help us get closer to that. But I think having some type of a working group that can take this information with some ideas, give them 2 weeks, say, hey, here's some things, this is what we're considering, give us some feedback on that. Why would we not want to do that? Short of going out and sending out another 6,000 or 8,000 surveys, a survey to 8,000 people, I think we can get ourselves with a couple hundred people that can say, hey, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? Send that out to them. You got 2 weeks to give some feedback. Send it back to Morgan and let her compile that and get it back to us so that we can have that going into the next workshop. I think that's some viable ways to get some good feedback.
Could we send out flyers like door to door and have them like between above the tracks and below the tracks, all those neighborhoods involved? Because those are the ones that you want to hear from.
You do. And Steve has by law, when he makes some changes on zoning, he's required by law to basically send out public notices within a certain radius of the area. I know he's got, I assume, got some signs out, but I don't know if he's reached out to anybody personally by address. So that's a question I'm not sure.
Mayor, again, that's a requirement for the planning commission. That was done November, December, January of 2019, 2020. And again, like I said, there was a lot of public comments that we've heard from for those last months of that I can send you. And it's probably all those people that you've indicated that wanted to have a response. So
Mayor, is there a way that as you take public comment though, that it is not all done in that meeting in a verbal town hall format, because to me, that doesn't seem like we're very effective. We don't seem to get any conversation amongst the decision makers. It seems to be a lot of repeated conversation. So if they could have either one spokesman that gives a short presentation, or if they
Perfect.
wanted to submit it in writing, and we looked at every one of those questions written wise, but we don't seem to do very well, in my observation, in a meeting where anybody can just come to the microphone and talk.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. You surely want something constructive. How about if we reach out? Like I say, I think Morgan will tell you, we've got, I think, 85 people who have signed up specifically on any issue dealing with the train station. Let's send that out there and ask them how they'd like to get their input into this conversation.
That's fine. I mean,
Okay.
certainly we want to hear from the people who are impacted by it. But
Absolutely.
we've got to do it in a productive way.
Yeah.
And
good
the
point.
We
time
haven't
limit.
always been really productive in a work session if they just come and present.
Yeah, good point. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, you've got 3 minutes.
Yeah, I know we're getting close. Anything else you'd like to bring up before we jump into our city council meeting?
Nope.
Okay. Hey, thank you. It been a good meeting. We've got some good direction. Steve, I think you got some taskings. If you can help us move with that, please use those worksheets. There's very specific language you'd like to see adjusted or changed. Please send that in. Send it to Matt. He'll collect all that, and then we can basically get that out to you prior to our next meeting. And with that, then, do I have a motion then to adjourn this work session?
So moved.
Okay.
Second,
Okay. Was that Jan?
yes.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jan. All in favor?
I
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned.